Welcome to Convergence.fm. I'm your host, Ashok Shivanand.
I think that's like the first step in solving problems, just understanding exactly what that is and distilling it down and what is the simplest solution we can find. And honestly, that kind of work AI can help with.
On the show, we explore how purpose-driven leaders align their culture, operations, and experimentation to de-risk the decisions that really matter and lead AI-enabled businesses with clarity. Convergence.fm. Transform from the inside out. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Convergence.fm. Our guest today is a self-proclaimed garbage man who also vibe codes. Our guest, Ryan Collins, is the managing director at Tahoe Truckee Sierra Disposal out in California. And I'm especially excited about it because I think Ryan and his team are a poster child for the AI transformation that we often talk about on Convergence.fm. They've made multi-million-dollar changes to their garbage collection business by harnessing artificial intelligence and other forms of automation in a very smart and pragmatic way. I think this is especially impressive because there's a blue-collar workforce that he's had to transform alongside his leadership team. Ryan, who leads the technology initiatives, doesn't have a ton of technology experience himself, and they're doing this on razor-thin budgets for the size of business that they are, and wouldn't typically have had a ton of money to invest in CapEx for AI and technology, but they're able to figure it out in really smart ways. When Ryan first moved back to Tahoe to join the family business from working at a Silicon Valley startup, he showed up to a largely manual operations with a lot of pen and paper. Some of the workforce was still using slide rulers. So he initially had to convince them to even use Microsoft Excel. And we get to hear that story of how he converted the early adopters into power users. And now folks are just generating ideas after ideas on how even artificial intelligence can help themselves, help their customers, and ultimately build a better, stronger business. He's even got folks who drive garbage trucks every day showing up with ideas that they put on the whiteboard framework that he talks about. And I love how he'd much rather have too many ideas on this whiteboard than too few, because it means that he's got a workforce that's really engaged and trusting the digital transformation versus being lethargic or afraid of it. We get to talk about how initially he used to vibe code these solutions himself on weekends, and the wins from the vibe coded solutions led to warranting their first in-house technology hire, as well as some of the hiring practices that he puts into place now, where he looks well beyond resumes in terms of who is the best fit for their team at TTSD. Along the way, they've also, through this experienced a ton of challenges as well as pitfalls, which he's been super kind and vulnerable in sharing with us. He talks about how they sometimes spend way too much time vibe coding a solution that the problem wasn't never big enough to solve, including over-engineering it sometimes and hiring MIT experts. He talks about how they now, though, have a very simple framework and this whiteboard he mentions about how they're constantly prioritizing the highest business value impact problems and then solving only those ones from an AI and technology and automation standpoint versus spreading their efforts way more thin. Another concern that they have, that a lot of us do when it comes to AI, is either the cost of using AI in the long term or the privacy and security concerns that come with uploading our sensitive data into cloud-based solutions like OpenAI. And Ryan talks about how they're actually government contractors, and so they've got stipulations in their contracts that disallows them from using that, and how they were able to come up with super smart, pragmatic solutions that didn't violate any of their contracts, protected the integrity and privacy of their customers' data, while still getting the benefits of technology, artificial intelligence, and automation to build a better, more automated business. The episode has a ton of stories. We get to hear about how they were able to find an alternative to a $120,000 a year solution for their call centers, using a $2,500 gaming laptop and some open source models to ultimately build something that he thinks is better for his business and more bespoke. And we get to hear about how some of those some of the data from there has led to better decisions. We get to hear about how they solved a $30,000 a year recurring problem that was just a huge pain for them using just a $75 controller and vibe coding over the weekend. We get to hear about even lightweight solutions to big problems that they've had in their operations that cause major headaches for their workflows around things like geolocation and having address validation done through really simple things that AI is able to do for them, as well as how they better engage their workforce. They have a largely Spanish-speaking workforce, and they were able to modernize and translate a number of their safety and training videos using AI, as well as engage their workforce more in providing more clarity around benefits, things like 401k, using better translated videos versus going through the process they had before that didn't necessarily cross the translation and language barriers as well. I found this to be a very fun and valuable episode because it touches on a number of things that we talk about here very often. Things like how to foster an engaged culture and bring your workforce along with your AI and digital transformation. We get to talk about how you can run a better business and have better operations by making smarter decisions using data that is oftentimes generated or acquired by AI and technology. We're going to talk about product thinking and how they prioritize the most impactful problems to solve versus chasing after hype and trends or trying to spread their efforts and budget across everything. And finally, we also get to talk about really pragmatic, ineffective, fast ways to build AI and technology solutions that ultimately drive huge customer benefit, huge business impact, and make life a lot better for all of their employees. So without much more, here is my episode on Convergence.fm with Ryan Collins. Subscribe to the podcast to get future episodes as soon as they're published. If you find this helpful, give the podcast a 5-star rating on your podcast app or hit that like button on YouTube. So, I think there's some really, really remarkable aspects of the story here where this is a waste collection, recycling, essentially a garbage business, and with a blue-collar workforce, and that you're the managing director of, and you're also leading a lot of the tech initiatives, being a poli-sci grad. So I feel like there's a lot of, there's a great story here that I think can inspire a lot of folks. And maybe get us started in terms of like, how did this technology adoption or enablement get started for you at the firm?
And thanks for having me on. It's great to be on the pod. As you said before, perfectly put, I am a garbage man at the end of the day. So, I still feel like a garbage man mostly without, especially without any tech background, any formal training, engineering training. I think my journey in this space started with just wanting to solve problems and make things more efficient. And, I think I did get a few touch points with tech, building a startup of my own out of college, just tooling around and, playing around with Python and MATLAB. And then, when I started in the family business, I literally walked in and I saw people sitting at desks with rulers and highlighters running reports. And some of these folks, 7 hours a day with a ruler and a highlighter, right? Just government reports. And that really, made me, I was frightened by that coming in. Even in 2017, that was kind of a 1980s way of doing things. And so, my goal throughout was, how do I automate the things that matter, get this busy work off of people's desks? And so, I just started playing around, and it was mostly free time stuff like, becoming the Excel nerd that I still am, playing around with VBA, even for some more advanced applications. And, over time, I was able to automate, thousands of hours of reporting on the background and on the back end. And that kind of started the journey and set the stage. It was really a free time project by an absolute hack of a garbage man, just trying to cut some hours down. So that's really where it all began.
I love it. You mentioned Excel nerd a few times. I have been gifted a coffee mug that says like freak in the sheets myself. And I'm curious, have you heard of the Financial Modeling World Cup?
I first off, I have the shirt variant of that mug, so
there you go.
Very familiar. I must admit, I'd love an invitation if they're.
We could do a mock run here. I don't know if I'm as good as the guys, but the YouTube videos are pretty fun to watch, especially if you're like also into like shortcuts and hotkeys and stuff. But
Absolutely.
Going back to what you were talking about there, I think taking like a very problem first approach. And even starting out with something as simple but also powerful as Excel to do automation of manual tasks, that's ultimately what, the true value comes from figuring out where the biggest problems are and then finding ways to make that a little bit more efficient and easy. And I think the other part that I'd love for you to talk about is how you've got this really engaged workforce that is maybe a lot more like problem oriented or identifying solutions. And that's really hard to do in any workforce. Maybe it's not fair to say, but I also have a hunch that in this type of industry, it's underserved around technology and automation. And so changing that mindset is also probably something that is hard to do. So talk to me about what the workforce felt like about, you coming in and trying to mess stuff up with their spreadsheets and fancy new gadgetry.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. First off, like even the industry, as I found out years later, even the industry itself is kind of stuck in the 1980s when it comes to tech. I still receive screenshots from a large Forbes 400 waste entity, which I won't mention the name, of MS-DOS for an accounting backend, and it's amazing to think that there are still folks running, full-fledged systems like that. But, the injecting tech into the business was not easy, and especially a low-tech industry with a lot of blue collar, but also a family business that was kind of stuck in its ways and operating as if it was 1970, 1980. And so my first step was, and in fact, I think when I started, I was a little too aggressive in automating things. There was not a whole lot of comfortability with the idea of any kind of CLI tools, any kind of command line, anything. So Excel was kind of my bridge point for connecting people to solutions that they could see. And, I still think it's a really great visual tool. And the way that I kind of transitioned there, and just to kind of give the play-by-play here on how I converted at least people into that mindset, I kind of started with Excel, put some advanced, some better formulas in there, some matrix style formulas, and kind of brought up with me, a few users in the company to be kind of the next phase of power users. And once they could see what that was doing and that automation it provided, or semi-automation, I think, it started changing their mindset a bit. And, then I think migrating into using some other tools like Python pandas, it was great because that allowed me to inject kind of command line libraries with also having the visual benefit of Excel. Ultimately, it's been a long journey, and I could talk a little bit more about where we are currently, because I think we've really built an exciting energy. But that was really the origin point for just getting those small little automation wins into the workplace and having people trust that it was something that was possible. Once I got that spark down, it was pretty easy to take off.
It could do most of what we needed. And this is especially in the pre-vibe coding days where we didn't have access to things like Supabase and stuff, and setting up a database took a little bit more time. We'd be able to spin up a UI within literally minutes, if not half hour, and put something in front of target users and test out a workflow, test out whether there's desirability in the user's standpoint and things like that we could course correct for very, very cheap experimentation. So I think it's awesome that back then you kind of just started with Excel versus trying to get too fancy. The second thing is a lot of folks, when they're coming in from a change management standpoint, I think make the mistake of trying to convince everybody when you absolutely don't have to. Just getting the first few kind of believers on board and getting them in there is like way more progress, I think, in the long run, because once you recruit those early adopters, they will help you recruit the next sort of tranche of believers. And not sure if you did that intentionally or not, but looking back, I love kind of how that played out for you. That being said, I'd love to hear kind of where things have progressed since the ruler and highlighter days and the early Excel sort of VBA scripts that you were writing.
Absolutely. Well, we saw exactly the playbook that you mentioned there. And, starting with Excel was powerful because it's something that's already sitting on most users' desktops and doesn't take too much. At least at the time when we were building it, it was one of those things you could hop on YouTube and we could convert a power user, a regular user into a power user pretty quickly. And so, it really, I think there were two phases here, which was getting people off a ruler and highlighter straight into Excel, and really choosing the people that I knew could build things. They had ideas for, hey, I want to automate this, and it was just a matter of, hey, look what we did to this report over here. And the minute that they feel that trust and they see what's possible, it's like if you find the right person in your organization, it's just a takeoff moment. And all of a sudden they're going around and I'm getting emails left and right, like, hey, I just built this new model in Excel. What do you think? And, once we started converting people into power users, I think it was just, the best thing in the world. And that second stage was really, those people then kind of going a step further. They're saying, hey, look at the stuff that I wrote this formula in Excel. It was exposing them to like Python pandas. I wonder what I could do if I, watch a YouTube tutorial for a couple hours and see if I can connect this thing to a database now. And, sure enough, little by little, you just start injecting that kind of knowledge into the organization. And, fast forward a few years, we have this new reality with AI where these users are, not just a few hours on YouTube away from solving a problem. They're a few minutes, chatting with an AI. So, I think today is dramatically different from before. We have not only a really strong set of power users in-house that are using AI to build, applications left and right, not only just edit emails, like, most organizations I think feel is the primary use case, but they're actually building applications, they're building automation, and they've really converted the rest of the team into feeling like we can solve any problem.
And so for context here, maybe give us an idea of like an application recently that your team maybe spun up that, the Excel and ruler highlighter version of Ryan would be very proud and surprised that y'all came up with more recently.
Our first real use case for AI building something, and I think a lot of people will call this vibe coding. For us, we're very cautious with that, with what we build. It has to be tested. We have to really understand what the final result is, and we have to understand, does this actually work in the real world? But I think our first kind of foray into the AI landscape was we had this big problem on the facility level where we knew we needed hardware and software. And it was actually an IoT problem. We run a huge recycling facility where we're processing, sometimes up to 600 tons of waste per day. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's, imagine a factory kind of floor with a bunch of motors and compressors and sensors. So we had this issue where we kept having this freezing issue. We're in the mountains on the top of a mountain, and we quite literally will get locked into a blizzard, not have power for 12 days at a time. And so we really needed to solve this IoT problem. We went to the market, couldn't find any solution that was custom fit. And, being a lean family business, we really needed to find kind of a scrappier solution than the market would have.
And so what was the problem kind of more specifically, like with context with the mountains and the blizzards and stuff?
So, I think ultimately it was a really simple problem. And by the way, I think that's like the first step in solving problems, just understanding exactly what that is and distilling it down and what is the simplest solution we can find. And honestly, that kind of work AI can help with, but that's kind of the front running work. To summarize it quickly, it's basically, we had a compressor that was shutting down, and it would fail. Like one of the components on the compressor would fail, and it would lead to the fire system starting. And so that would put water into the pipes. And oftentimes it would happen when we didn't want it to, 10, 11 p.m. at night, nobody's around. And so we had a bunch of water in the pipes that would freeze and then come back the next day. We have not only a fire system that's broken, but a whole bunch of water to unfreeze in the pipes. Hard to visualize, probably, but essentially, it was a pipe freezing issue, and we really just needed to know if that system was triggered in any way and understand, maybe even in a better case scenario, where the failure points were. So, and by the way, we were spending like $30,000 a year just in repairs to that one single failure. And it would occur at least once or twice, even sometimes per year. So nothing on the market. ChatGPT had launched pretty recently. We took a stab at it. We found these really cheap microcontrollers called ESP32s. I don't know if you're familiar, but that's like our bread and butter for everything we build on the hardware side. And ChatGPT helped us to build a system, and even down to the programming layer on the microcontrollers, a system that was complex enough, because there were several different components to this. It allowed us to build something that fully resolved the issues. Basically, an IoT monitoring hardware and software. That was an amazing moment for us because it convinced a whole host of people, even down to the blue collar level, the guys that were literally, hated their job when they had to go unfreeze those pipes. All of a sudden that problem went away and that annual pilgrimage was no longer. And, there was this flood, I think after that point, just this flood of new ideas pouring in, hey, what if we do this over here? What if we build this over there? And all of a sudden we've got a whole list of things that we need to build, want to build. So,
and this was a $30,000 a year problem that you solved.
30 to 60K per year. And the material cost, by the way, to solve it, $75.
Yeah, I figured the ESPs are under $100. That's awesome. And this was also, for context though, this was like 22, 23 timeframe, right? It was a while ago, given the kind of decades ago in the vibe coding kind of chronology. Yeah. That's amazing. And what I'm kind of just very curious, what prompted you to kind of even try to use AI back then to solve the problem?
I've always had a tinkering mindset. So for me, it was like one of those just, hey, let's play around with this new tool. Let's see if it what it can do. And, at the time, searching Reddit and that kind of thing, we were seeing people I was looking at other similar projects that had been successful using ChatGPT. So I thought, hey, let's give it a shot. And it worked out very well for that initial use case. And
how long did that take you, if you remember?
It was a weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was dramatically different because, I wasn't completely foreign to writing, scripting a little bit myself. Like I would sit on a weekend and, automate this, county report using Python, but it would take me forever because I'm not trained. I'm not a trained software engineer. So, it would be, it'd take me multiple weekends to write something. And for that, with ChatGPT, it's like that sped it up to, well, at the time it was hours. Now it's probably minutes. So,
you talked about kind of, maybe pun intended, the flood of ideas that came after you solved the and that kind of maybe leads to like a new set of problems that you've earned, where vibe coding is super addicting in terms of how quickly you're able to get feedback. You can end up in a vortex. You could potentially kind of have a sense of procrastination when, I know founders who are meant to be out selling or fundraising as their top critical priority, but they spent kind of 4 days vibe coding a prototype that they want to launch kind of 2 years out. And the addiction level can kind of get in the way of your judgment sometimes. And I'm curious, is there a sense of that problem that you experienced, and like, how do you go about managing it?
Both personally and organizationally, that problem is something you really have to, it's a luxury to have, but it definitely can get in the way. I think someone with a ADHD problem-solving mind like myself can really struggle with, hey, I want to solve this tiny little thing, and the total cost or the total burden of solving it may be, hey, the company saves $100 per year, so it's probably not worth your time. And so I think, with the flood of ideas that we have had and both have now, it was really important for us. We did get a little bit off the rails. We were kind of looking at all these projects, working them simultaneously. And, I think we realized pretty quickly, when the list hit like 80, we said, we've got to really focus on what's important here and understand not only what are the problems, what is the amount of time that it's going to take to solve this, how important it is it financially, but also, can AI actually solve this to the level of accuracy and detail that we need? And so there is some filtering that has to occur there. And for us, it's pretty simple. We literally have a whiteboard, which we translate to a list, just using Excel. But we have a whiteboard, and we've got all of these ideas that are flowing in from people on the ground, from the office, from the ground. We have ideas that are coming to us from drivers now. That's how much this kind of culture of problem solving, spread throughout the business. And, we just map them out. And about every quarter, we'll take a look at that list again, figure out where we are on the development cycle. And we work on 3 items at a time. So it's like, hey, these are the 3 items we're working on. And that's it. So, and it's mostly based on value to the business.
Something that I really love about this, that we oftentimes teach our clients is, and the design thinking nerds call it the double diamond. Essentially, it's because it looks like 2 diamonds, and what you're doing is initially thinking like divergently, or where quantity over quality in terms of ideas. So you've got this whiteboard full of ideas. That's a great example. And initially, having more is better. Provided you're kind of doing this like convergent thinking afterwards of saying, hey, now amongst all these sticky notes, we're going to prioritize the ones that are worth working on, right? And the second thing about the double diamond is there's 2 of these, because we want to focus first on like the problem and prioritizing based on which problems need to be solved in the business, and ideate on that first. And then, like you did, you kind of look at like, okay, if this problem was solved, what kind of impact would it have? Or what's the cost of not solving it that we're incurring right now, for example? And then those 3 kind of emerge. And then the justification of the amount of investment that goes into it is pretty apparent, because you know how much money you're losing, like in the case of that $30,000 to $60,000 a year. And then, and only then do we start thinking about, okay, what are the different ways for this top problem? Can we solve it? And then we go again, like divergent, and start thinking about like, what are all the different ways? No idea is a bad idea, because don't worry, we're going to converge later and think about what's the one that's going to get us closest to the solution with the least amount of investment, or like you mentioned, like where AI can most likely actually have an impact versus cause more chaos. And again, you all kind of seem to have arrived at this just very iteratively, maybe as a function of constraints. So talk me through, how you got to that.
Like any business, you have to prioritize. And for us, it was extremely important. It is extremely important because we're still operating on a pretty small budget. And, as a garbage company, CapEx is pretty high. And, when it comes to spending money on tech, it's just not something that, is a priority. So I think for us, the important kind of check step was, all right, we've got all of these items we've got all these items mapped out on a list, tons of great feedback. That was an important step for the company, just culturally, I think, is just injecting this culture of problem solving into the fold. But what we do is we bring that back to management. We bring that back to kind of the higher level decision making, and we try to map it out. We try to model, hey, what's the cost here? What is the savings? What's our expected timeline for this? And does it require maintenance? If it requires a lot of maintenance, that's another deciding variable. So, we try to just, like you said, put everything on the board, startup style, throw it all on there, and then really just start carving away at it with some higher level kind of management thinking. And, along the way, we're bringing in middle managers, we're bringing in other departments. Hey, maybe this project has some impact that's cross-functional. And, from there we build. And, the beauty of this, I think, and the reason that I think AI has been so transformative for us is in this process, the people on the ground are often the best suited to solving the problems because they're experiencing them every day and they know how to solve them. The people on the management side are best to understand, where's the ship going? Where are my priorities as a business? And it's really hard to kind of meet in the middle sometimes. And AI, I think, has closed that gap. Just because you can iterate and prototype so quickly, it used to take months to get to prototype, and that expenditure was just not justified. Now you can almost walk in with a wireframe, after 5 minutes of sitting with someone on the ground and say, hey, here's what we want to build. This is what it looks like. It immediately, you can make something more visual. It can really, I think help that analysis speed up a lot, to what it needs to be.
I'm going to butcher some neuroscience here, but I think there is some kind of math around how a time delay of how quickly you can see evidence of an idea being formed. And back in the day when you had to communicate with an engineer and there's risk in terms of how that communication goes, and then it takes a week or a month or whatever to kind of get the first version back, you kind of get out of that flow state where that problem that you're trying to solve is top of mind and get distracted. And I think having this rapid feedback, even if it's a visual prototype, that then you're kind of starting to put more of a back end and everything back together, kind of keeps folks very engaged. You're at risk of getting addicted to it and solving problems that aren't necessarily worthwhile. And then maybe also, I know in my case, like over engineering is another kind of challenge there, which I think, you might have experienced yourselves.
Oh, 100%. And, I think we have a really good process now to kind of manage through some of the issues of rapid iteration and ideation. Of course, it's a great problem to have. I think I would rather have a company culture that is throwing a bunch of stuff on that whiteboard than one that has no whiteboard at all.
Absolutely.
But we've definitely, that being said, we've definitely made some mistakes in pursuing things that may have been a little bit out of reach of AI, and we kind of had to sit on our hands and wait it out a little bit longer than expected. Like, we were looking at solving this problem on routes, which was, we basically serve trash out of these, or we collect trash out of these bear sheds. We have a lot of wildlife issues, a lot of bears in the Lake Tahoe area. And so we have, essentially two guys on the street that are walking up every single driveway and opening a metal door. It kind of looks like a metal shed. So it's very time consuming to walk up there, and we have a lot of second homes. So those sheds are, empty quite a bit of the time, especially in the low season. And that's just a huge amount of wasted effort that I would really love to solve. And, we kind of jumped in, given some of our IoT successes, we jumped into it and we said, hey, let's solve this with AI. And, I think we were a little overly ambitious. I think this was a demonstration of where you really need an expert. We jumped into it, built some prototypes, and it just wasn't working. And we burned a ton of man hours trying to solve it. And, we ended up kind of pressing pause on it, went and found some experts at MIT and Stanford and PhD, this and that, and we tried to come back and solve it. Very challenging problem. As it turns out, it was not even within the real physical or the physics realm of solving at the time.
Wow.
And so, and AI, I don't think was to the level of advancement that would have allowed us to do that with the low power requirements that we needed for this sensor, et cetera. So, we did burn a little bit on that. We had to kind of wait it out. To cap off that story, though, I will say that I think the speed in which AI has been improving over time has allowed us to kind of go back and rethink this. And so we actually brought in a high school intern over the summer who was able to do what some folks at MIT could not, which is shocking. But with the help of AI, we've actually built this device and should be deployed in testing here within the month. So
that's amazing. That a high school intern plus AI was able to do better than the MIT experts.
This is not saying, MIT, fantastic folks, work with them all the time. They're awesome.
Of course.
But yeah, it was a shocking moment for us.
And I imagine that in this line of work, you have government contracts and the stipulations that come around privacy and security, and using AI has probably got some hot buttons there. And so I'm curious how you go around that.
Absolutely. We're, as any garbage company is, we are a government contractor. So, managing that kind of information and responsibility that comes with that is sometimes a big lift. You have to be really, really careful. And so, with AI tools, the problems that we've solved using AI are mostly, internal and highly sensitive when it comes to protection of customer information, et cetera. I will mention one example, though, which I think is actually kind of exciting, where we're running a call center. We have a call center in Reno, Nevada, and we manage. We have around 30,000 active weekly customers, and so that can be a lot of phone calls. Sometimes 300 to 600 phone calls a day. We had this issue in the call center, and there's a lot of customer information being exchanged there. Everything from credit card numbers to addresses to mailing addresses. So we had to be extremely careful with looking at this from the get-go. But we had this issue where we really wanted to understand how to fix some of the customer relations, public relations problems we were experiencing a couple of years ago. And when we first started looking at it, we went to the market and we said, hey, we think we need a CRM plugin, or maybe something that plugs in with our VoIP system that can listen to phone calls and or transcribe phone calls and actually provide some useful data. So we looked at it. As it turns out, it was pretty expensive. It was not within the realm of our budget. We were talking $50,000 to $120,000 a year to be able to do this. And we really wanted to have a robust data set because we have very seasonal population. So we wanted at least a year of data. And so I kind of turned to AI, and, to make a long story short, we built this incredible tool. I built it over a weekend using Claude, Anthropic's Claude. And it's an incredible tool. It's a local GUI-based tool, so anybody can run it. It's got typical chat interface like you're used to seeing. And you can run it in manual mode or automated mode. And it'll take the MP3s from the call center every day, pulls them in, and it's completely locked away from the internet, which is, I think, something amazing, but also significant to the privacy question that you mentioned.
And when you say local here, you mean it's sitting on a local device?
That's right.
So it's at your facility.
Yeah, in fact, it's actually it's sitting on a gaming computer that I built myself, or constructed myself. So very low cost gaming computer. We're talking in the $1,500 range. Running a beefy GPU, but something that you would see in a normal household, and the certainly not a server grade. And essentially what this tool does is it takes the MP3 calls from the day, transcribes them using an open source model called Whisper, transcribes all the phone calls, and then allows you to question the transcript per phone call. So you can write a question in the interface. You can basically say like, hey, what was the topic of this call in its most simplest form? Mm-hmm. And it'll take that transcription that it has, pass it through another local model. We've made it completely modular, so you can plug in whatever you want. Right now, we're using Mistral for the analysis, and then it just spits the result out, and it'll do it in both transcript form and in Excel form. And then, as an added step, it'll take that Excel file and actually run some analysis on it. And the most amazing thing is, this is running. It's doing about 1,000 calls per hour. It's fully built using AI. We've cross-checked it 1.5 million times to ensure the accuracy of the system, and it's like this perfect AI assistant that's just doing its work at night on this gaming computer and providing us with this super valuable analysis. In fact, it dramatically changed our perspective on where the issues were and where we needed to optimize in the call center. And the total cost, I guess you could call it the gaming computer itself and maybe a week's worth of Claude. So.
Yeah, I want to double click on so many things there. So from a business standpoint, you alluded to where you were kind of driving improvements or making decisions, and the data was able to change the direction of that and kind of point you to where the challenges actually were.
Totally. I think that there's a first step that a lot of people miss in this AI journey, which is you should do some playing around first. You have to figure out if the stuff you're looking at is accurate. Like any data problem, or any analysis problem, you have to have good data. Mm-hmm. I think we have a bit of a process for that. I think part of it is throwing it into an LLM to see what shakes out. Hey, analyze this. These A, B, and C, and just let us know what we should look at here. There's a little bit of playing around with data in Excel, kind of just to preface that work. I think you have to understand how accurate is the data, what kind of conclusions can we come to ourselves sitting in a room, and is this something within the realm of AI's capability? And by the way, there's also this for you vibe coders out there. There's also this kind of what accuracy level am I okay with? So, I think for some of these applications, and what quality level am I okay with? So for some of these things, like the call center tool, I don't need an enterprise grade software, right? I just need to understand if someone's calling in about dumpsters more than they're calling in about residential cans, and it would be great if I could even have more granularity, right? Oh, they're calling in to understand what the dumpster size is. Wow, sounds like I need to enhance my website. That's what I'm really going for. I'm not doing, launching a rocket based on, using the data to do something as important as that. So I think understanding those limitations is also something that should be stated. On the call center topic, we went into this problem thinking that we needed better customer service for managing complaints. We thought we had, a whole host of route related issues, and that the call center demand was mostly being taken with complaints. And when you ask, there's this bias because if you ask a manager, the manager is dealing with the highest order complaints. And so what they'll tell you is, oh yeah, we have huge problems in the call center. And that's the feedback we were getting. And so and they were also relaying all of the, all the bad examples, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So, when we went into that analysis, we originally thought, okay, we've got, at least half of the time in the call center is being spent, maybe 80% is being spent on complaints. It sounds like we're going down in flames on our public relations side of things. We really need to figure this out. And that was the original need for it. With this analysis, we determined shockingly that the level of complaints was actually sub 6%, and that the biggest issue in the center, the issue we were spending the most time on was related to dumpsters, and it was related to dumpster ordering, and most specifically, where do I put the dumpster, and what sizes are the dumpsters, and some really basic stuff. And it was like 60 in some times of year, upwards of 60-70% of the call center volume was related to this really simple issue. And so we completely course corrected, using that data, made some significant adjustments to the way that we communicate, adjustments to website, and we're currently building a scheduling tool for dumpster ordering that will completely eliminate that from the call center. And eventually, that's, if you think about it, that's like, we have 8 people in the call center. We're using about 4 people's worth, to answer questions about dumpsters, and that AI tool in one weekend of analysis was able to just completely blow away our assumptions. So
that's amazing. So we're not just thinking about the comparison of the $50,000 SaaS options to the $2,000 to $3,000 computer, or the fact that you got it in there has now reallocated a whole bunch of capital in terms of how those 8 folks are now able to kind of solve more meaningful problems, because the website automation, if you want to call it that, has solved like a primary call reason. So that I love that a decision got to be made as a result of it that has more than warranted, like well past $50,000, let alone the cost of this computer. The other thing I wanted to kind of get into is like you're using an open source model here with Mistral as what it sounded like. And so there's virtually no cost for that, or Whisper, which is another thing I want to make sure everyone knows. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. Whisper is another local open source model. Both models can just be downloaded on Hugging Face or the repository of your choice. Mm-hmm. And they're just exceptional because, and I think a lot of people don't realize, everybody has these subscriptions. If you're like myself, you have 5 AI chatbot subscriptions and you're using them interchangeably. But folks don't realize that local models are just as powerful, and especially if you understand what the task is, what you need to solve. And especially on language. That's why I think the call center is such a great use case for this, because language application, of course, is where LLMs really excel. So, so for us, it's basic. I think with all of the models included, excluding the phone calls themselves, we're talking about 2 completely free open source models and about 6 gigabytes of space, and that's it. So pretty remarkable.
That really is phenomenal. You do use the cloud APIs in other cases, and I'm curious, if you've got a framework or a mental model established of where you use the paid APIs and where it makes sense to use open source.
We don't use the APIs a whole lot. I will say there are some instances where we're doing something internally. It's non-protected, very very unprotected data. It's not super sensitive. That's when we'll be using an API call, and we do that for a lot of products. Whether it's Google Maps or Chat or OpenAI's API, but it's really meant as like a higher level filtering mechanism for analysis. And I think the most commonly used kind of cloud function is just your typical chatbot. And by the way, I can speak about a lot of use cases for just ChatGPT in our workplace, and tools like Cursor. They've been completely transformative along things that you would never expect too. Like, a blue collar business has a lot of translation that has to occur. You have people that speak. We have 4 or 5 different languages represented. For half of our team, 50% of the company does not speak English, and so being able to interface is a difficult problem sometimes, especially for higher level management. I myself had to pick up at least conversational Spanish, but when you get to really technical details, like, hey, I need to talk about a 401k plan, or whatever, that's just something that's very challenging. And with these tools, you can hop on, an OpenAI or a ChatGPT voice session and be super specific too. You can say, hey, I'm sitting with a blue collar worker. I know they're from northern Mexico, so any colloquial phrases you have for that would be helpful. Keep it simple, that kind of thing. I'm getting a little off track, but I think there's a ton of use case for cloud products. And just one more note on security. If we do use a cloud, if we have need for a cloud, like our website, very cloud-based everything, we do cross-check with a developer. If we're injecting a piece of software into the public space, we're absolutely bringing a developer on, whether it's on Upwork or somewhere else, to ensure that it has all the necessary, security wrapped around it.
Fostering an engaged product organization and aligning them with the principles around lean, human-centered design, and agile will more than likely lead to successful business outcomes for your organization. But getting started or getting unblocked can be hard. This podcast is brought to you by the player coaches over at Integral. They help ambitious companies like you build amazing product teams and ship products in artificial intelligence, cloud, web, and mobile. Listeners to the podcast can head on over to integral.io/convergence and get a free product success lab. During this session, the Integral team will facilitate a problem-solving exercise that gives you clarity and confidence to solve a product, design, or engineering problem. That's integral.io/convergence. Now, back to the show. This brings me right to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was at what point do you sort of promote beyond the vibe-coded prototypes and go to something a little bit more productionized?
Totally. This, I think, is the step that vibe coders really need to understand, and it's hard sometimes to figure that out. I think for us, if we are solving a simple problem and we know that we can validate the results pretty well, like we can set up a test, or we can even open it up in Excel and do some cross-checking on it, and we know we're able to monitor it, and it's not going to totally break us if it fails. That's when we don't really, we're pretty confident in the tool, and as long as we tested it, we're totally fine. But like I said, anything that requires that maybe slightly higher order level complexity, or financially for the business, it's a huge chunk we want to get right, or something like that IoT product that we're deploying into the field, we're spending a lot of money on, we definitely bring in, an expert. And so anything public facing of extreme value. And the beautiful thing about this is, you can get the product to wireframe, you can get it to 90% of what you think it should look like. Of course, you're going to backtrack a little bit, probably with the developer, fixing your vibe-coded mistakes, but you can at least really accelerate that development curve. In my perspective, we have some projects that I've chatted with some folks who are software engineers by trade, and I can see some of our projects which would be on a 10-month development cycle coming down to like 3 weeks, and that's just an incredible speed of development. So I've said too much, but security is important. It's important to understand when you have to change and call the expert in.
Yeah, I think that's super important and also really great framing. I want to touch on a few things with respect to your workforce here. And I think one of them is that you have now gone from doing this on the weekends to hiring an in-house kind of technologist. Is that right? And how'd you come about that decision?
That's right.
Other than maybe you wanted your weekends back a little bit.
Yeah, it was selfish for sure. I would still say, I think I still do dedicate a little bit of my weekend to vibe coding. It's not the 48 hours that it used to be. Yeah, right. But even us garbage men, just out there vibe coding. But I think I was convinced when we saw so much of this success, and the tools that we were building were absolutely replacing the things that we would have otherwise gone to market for, and they were doing them better. they were solving the problems. We also run a fairly unique business. We have even a unique way of collecting the trash, if you can imagine that. And so we really needed tailored software for a lot of the problems that we're solving. And, I think with the success that we had over the years of me just sitting there on weekends, the financial impact of that and the ease of the operation was that, you could do easy back of the envelope math to say, hey, you know what? It's kind of paying for itself and more. And it would be great to have someone full-time, not only managing these products and iterating when we need to, but building new stuff. And so I went out on a search to find a person that could do that. Took me a while, but I did find someone that is now vibe coding in the middle of the day on a weekday. So, it's pretty remarkable. And through that, we've been able to apply AI to a whole bunch of things that I never even thought we could. 3D modeling. I never even thought it would be helpful there, and it's just been incredible. So,
you got me when you said there's a unique way of how you pick up trash, and knowing nothing about it. Tell me what's typical and what's unique.
Well, these days you're probably used to seeing this truck come down your street with a hydraulic arm that picks up a can. Yeah. And so that's a pretty normal reality. And that's pretty easy too, by the way, because, you've got a guy sitting in an air-conditioned cab with a joystick. For us, we have everything in the kitchen sink being thrown at us in terms of challenges. We've got bear issues. We have extreme blizzards. We have tight streets. And so, we have our entire routing operation can change one snowstorm. If there's a snowstorm, everything changes. All the routing logistics change. The equipment we're using. We actually build equipment in-house to kind of get past some of these challenges. So for us, the unique part is, as I mentioned before, we have to literally walk up to bear sheds, rain or snow, and open up the door, check for trash, put it in a truck. Sometimes running consolidation operations with a whole fleet of small little scout vehicles, in 6 feet of snow, freezing conditions, and then we're bringing that back to a facility where we uniquely sort everything, from the building that was demolished down the street to the Kleenex that was thrown in the can under your desk.
Wow.
So, looking for recyclables. So some unique stuff there.
That's awesome. And routing and dispatching, I imagine, is also a pretty primary AI use case. Like at Integral, I think it was back in 2017 that we built our first kind of AI ML dispatchers. It's kind of well before generative AI, of course. I'm curious what y'all use for that.
I wish I could say we have something advanced. We use kind of an off-the-shelf waste industry style product as our CRM. But I will say that AI has dramatically improved the speed in which we can make adjustments to data and to the system. Like one really easy example is it's really hard to clean addresses. When you have 30,000 addresses, there's so many typos, and validation isn't great in the mountains because we use PO boxes for everything. So the data is not widely available. So with AI, we were able to build an address validation tool that uses Google's mapping API. This is stuff that I would have absolutely bought, but we built in an hour. Simple thing, right? You'd think about it. It's like, okay, well, it's not that impressive, but for us, it's life-changing because now all of a sudden we have geolocation, we have address validation for, a whole bunch of messy data, and our data is clean and routes are running great. So that's not something I would have been able to do without, AI helping us get to that point.
Another thing I know is that the startup that you mentioned that you were part of and helped found, I think it was in the kind of employee engagement, employee feedback sort of space. And, having grown up in the tech world, I think I take for granted a lot of the things that we received as employees, where being so hyper competitive over recruitment space, I think companies have had to do everything and more to engage and retain employees and things well beyond just compensation. And realizing that, hey, the other industries, like in your case with waste disposal or in construction and in manufacturing, these things aren't necessarily as taken for granted or as well known. So I'm curious, when, coming in from sort of Silicon Valley, coming in from working specifically in the employee space into the blue collar workforce, if you were able to bring any of that mindset, and if it applies, if there were any surprise and delight moments or surprise and fail moments, what was that like?
Number one, I think everyone has this problem solving mentality somewhere. And it's really just a matter of getting them excited about it. And, I have genuinely been shocked, even myself. Sometimes you get a little cocky and you think that you know what the problem is and how to solve it. But I've been shocked more times than I can count by, a commercial driver, a residential driver coming up to me and saying, hey, you know what? I just had this idea. I think we could do it this way. And, it's the folks that have that excitement and the want to change things for the better that are perfectly capable of doing that. And, I think when I first started, like even with this kind of tech hire that I brought into the business, I made a mistake at the very beginning looking at titles over attitude. And one of the things that I did was, I found all these incredible masters in engineering, process engineering folks. I brought them in for interviews. I remember this one story. I actually flew someone out to the site and had him on site and, pulled out this schematic drawing of a garbage truck, hydraulic schematic. And I said, because I just wanted to understand his process, his problem solving approach. He said, hey, I've got a problem right here. What's just walk me through your thinking. We don't have to solve it, but, and he looks at it and he says, oh, I've never seen one of these. And I said, well, I understand. It's a garbage truck. You never see. And he goes, well, no, I don't really, the schematic, I'm not really super familiar with it. And yeah, I don't know. and this was someone with a resume, just 10-page resume with qualifications and everything he needed to do, but the mindset wasn't there. And I kept running into this problem. In fact, I hired someone that was like, that had these credentials and they just didn't have the attitude. And I ended up going back to the drawing board and trying to find someone who had basically a sign that they were doing this stuff in their free time. I wanted to understand that they were building something in their free time. So I found this incredible guy who, caught my eye originally. It said Arduino and made this drone in my free time and, built this computer and I just immediately was drawn to that. And, I think to make a long story short, you have to be, I found like the handyman of, the tech handyman who just has this multidisciplinary approach to things. And I think with AI, the power of AI is such that you can upscale that person's skill set in one of those areas. But the best problem solvers have this kind of multidisciplinary approach where they can see all of, they understand how all the systems interact. And that's, from the organizational standpoint, those are the people I target. I try to find, whether a driver or the hired gun, I really try to find the folks that have that kind of open mindset. And sometimes it's the people that are complaining the most. But as long as the complaints are coming with, hey, this really sucks over here. I really want to, what if we did this? That's how you've got that guy. So I've been surprised, more than I thought about, the ability of normal folks to generate great ideas, but also just I had to really cancel out my own assumptions about qualifications. That's not saying that, you don't need people with qualifications, but I think from a problem-solving perspective on the ground, it's important to have a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the beautiful things about the software industry that I think it's going to be maybe hugely challenging of like post-secondary education and everything right now, where you don't need that 4-year degree. We spent a bunch of time helping big OEMs rethink that requirement so they could open up their pipelines more in terms of recruiting. And if you're building a bridge or doing kind of civil engineering work, I'd probably want to make sure that the folks have their degrees before I drive over it. But I think there's a lot of different ways to analyze the credibility of a software engineer, and you can do it a lot more in real time. And then hire someone who's like a more of an attitude or cultural fit. If you're not kind of focused on some of the more kind of degree kind of things in their resumes.
Yeah, you can always bring in the specialist, and I think that's important to remember, right? With tools like Upwork and beyond, it's really it's easy to bring in really good talent and to fulfill any of those specialization needs.
Awesome. Any lessons learned for someone who's going to go out there and try and hire an engineer or someone out of Upwork that you might help them kind of skip the first couple of iterations?
For me, the best thing to do is to run an A/B test on any engineers that you are potentially looking at. So what I do is, if I have a piece of software that I need, that once again, I'm assuming I've fully vetted it in the organization, I know it's worth it. I need that extra 10% now, 20, maybe 50% to get it completed. I'll post that job on an Upwork, and I will ABC test. So I'll bring three engineers in, solve the same problem, and then whatever whoever comes out strongest, that's typically the person I'll finish it with. So that's my advice, is just use scientific method when you can.
That's good advice in life in general, I think.
Yeah.
So, hey, man, there's a few questions that we love to ask all our guests. And the first one, since this podcast tends to be about building delightful products and the super engaged teams behind them, I'm curious if there's a product that you unboxed recently, or maybe an experience or service that you got to experience that just totally blew your socks off and delighted you.
Absolutely. Well, first off, in the age of fast development, I can name probably 100. I think every week I'm just shocked by the new tools that are coming out, and the news cycle in tech is just so awesome. But one tool that I really that we're actually using currently in the business is called, I'm sure you're familiar with it, 11 Labs.
Oh yeah.
It's just an incredible translation tool. We actually film all of our own in-house safety videos, because we just find people connect with that a lot more than they do, the forklift training video from 1990.
Totally.
So
who'd have thought?
On VHS. So we film a lot of our own stuff, but it's really tedious to translate. And with 50% of our team basically Spanish only speaking, it would take an insane amount of time to do it. 11 Labs has been incredible. I'm not sponsored, I promise, but I want to be, because it's just an amazing thing. Like, we literally just upload our video, our safety video, could be 10-minute video, and it outputs the same video in Spanish with the voice intonation, which I think is just awesome, of the original speaker. And so
scary guy.
To me, it's just been it's been incredible. So I've been really impressed by that.
Awesome. 11 Labs. And then the next one is around a novel AI use case. Of course, that's been most of what we talked about, but I'm curious if you've heard of one recently, or one of your teammates or a peer showed you something in AI that you hadn't thought about, that you were like quite the aha.
For this one, I just, my mind has been on material science. I just read a book called Things Matter, and I'm really excited by, and everybody knows the story of AlphaFold, protein.
Everybody
folding.
except myself. So please tell me.
Oh, okay, sorry. AlphaFold, Google DeepMind, I think, originally built this AI model for determining how proteins fold. So the whole basis of everything, whether it's drugs or medical issues, etc., everything's protein based. So they've figured out a way to do this super efficiently in a simulated style way. And the results, I think, I'm just the most excited about, because I think it has a lot of implications not only for medical, pharmaceuticals, but also material science. I think that we're going to find some really cool materials that we're not currently aware of, if we can successfully model the world and all of its proteins using AI. So for me, that's something that's been on my mind recently, just because I've been reading a lot about material science.
That's awesome. And the name of that book again was Things Matter, is it?
Stuff Matters, actually.
Stuff Matters. Yeah. Okay, I'll check that out.
Yeah.
And then the next one is around, as you're leading teams, there's maybe like a particularly inspiring team. This could have been a team that you were on yourself, or a team that you knew about. It could be a sports team. Some folks kind of talk about like a fictional, like it was the A team. So the other question that we like to learn from our guests is, what's a particularly inspiring team that sort of like a North Star when it comes to being a team member as well as a team leader?
My mind right now, I probably should have an answer that's more related to the startup I built in organizational health, because I do think that culture is massively important in any business. But I've been really, and I'm very apolitical just before I say this, but I think that some of the things I'm seeing at SpaceX is just inspiring to me from the level of development that's occurring. And I'm specifically talking about the team that developed, and this is so nerdy, Ashok, I'm sorry to throw a nerd curveball at you, but
we don't have to apologize for being a nerd on here.
Fantastic.
For sure.
But I think it's incredible that just, and I'll tell you why I think in a sec, but the development of the Raptor engine, I think, is so underrated. This team got together and solved what is, has notoriously been one of the most complex rocket engineering problems over the last 50, 60 years, the full flow stage combustion cycle engine. And they solved it, and they iterated 3 times on it. And it's literally like this incredible 3D printed engine with insane amounts of thrust. The reason that I think this is so impressive is just the strategy of, build quickly, test aggressively, and reduce the complexity of something to its absolutely, absolute core, I think impresses me a lot. And I've been trying to do that, I think with our team and our development cycle is, hey, how do we simplify the problem? And, I use this jet engine as an analogy in my head, but you look at the complexity of what they built. And the Generation 3, if anybody hasn't Googled this, it's incredible. Raptor engine, variation 3 right now, iteration 3 is so simple. And it's just, you look at the beauty of that simplicity. For me, that's what I want everything to look like on our team. We may not be able to build a rocket engine, and that may be a little too complex, but I want to get to that level of simplicity where the solutions we're building solve the problem and only the problem, and can be maintained. So,
I love that. I was lucky to get to hear. No, I love it. I was lucky to get to hear one of their leads over at SpaceX, Kiko Domchev, talk about the process there. And it's pretty fascinating. We talk about iterating fast and fail fast, and there's a lot of things they just don't get to do. But at the same time, like I think it was one Christmas morning, they woke up to like a big rocket just falling over into the ocean that was slated to launch soon. And so the cost of failure is just so different. And so as much as we could talk about, iteration, the level of stress that goes into it and the implications are just so different there. It actually reminds me of, my answer for this is usually like the Apollo 13 team that was in mission control, like Ed Harris in the movie with the white vest, and all the problem solving they were able to do, where, critical lives were at stake. So I love that you took it to space nerdiness out of all the space. It's not surprising given the posters I'm seeing behind you there.
Yes. But it's funny. It's funny, Ashok. I use that Apollo 13 analogy all the time in the business. Like if we have a big problem we need to solve fast, I just go, okay, guys, Apollo 13 moment. Let's get the back of the flight manual and figure this out. Let's put everything on the table and let's see what we can do. So that's a better analogy, I think.
I love it. And hey, man, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of folks there that are interested in your business, interested in following up maybe. What's a good way for folks to get a hold of you?
If anybody wants to talk to a garbage man, talk trash, talk tech, I'm happy to speak about this. I'm incredibly passionate about applied tech in low tech industry, especially. And, I'd be happy to drop my email. I don't know if we can put it in the comments after you hit that like button, whatever makes sense.
We'll make sure to have your email in the show notes there. Well, Ryan, this was such a delightful conversation. We get to talk about the theory of this so often, and little bits and pieces of stuff that you talked about, and to hear about a non-technical person working in a low-tech field with a blue-collar workforce that's super fired up about tech is a dream come true in terms of like a super inspiring story that I think for a lot of folks out there wondering if they can do it, like I feel like non-disparagingly and no offense meant, if you can do it at your company, almost anyone can, I think.
I would agree. I'm an absolute hack of a garbage man. So, be confident in solving these problems. And Ashok, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure. It's been great to converge. And I look forward to talking more tech.
I hope you enjoyed that recording with Ryan Collins. There were 4 key things that stood out to me there that I wanted to talk about just a little bit more. The first one was around culture and how he took care of his people and how he brought his people along. In terms of, number one, when it came to initially kind of getting Excel and VB scripts to be adopted compared to a more pen and paper slide ruler process, he identified the early adopters and converted them into power users, and then got their help with transforming the rest of the workforce in terms of trusting and relying and ideating with technology more. I think it's also really interesting how they kind of got that to a point, even with a blue-collar workforce that historically may be a little bit more reticent to technology adoption compared to a white-collar workforce. I hate to paint with a broad brush, but I do think that it's important to call out that this is a little bit more of an upstream swim that he had. And I've spoken and done workshops with a number of folks that work in industries like manufacturing or construction, where there's similar sort of hesitation around using technology because you're worried about a blue-collar workforce taking to technology the same way. And I think this is a great example of how this kind of technology rolled out the right way with the right leadership direction, can help any workforce, whether it's blue collar or white collar, or what industry you work in. And I think with this latest generation of AI, the use cases that AI can be valuable and technology can be valuable is a lot more diverse as well. So that can no longer be an excuse now that we've heard from Ryan that you're not experimenting with how automation can help you with building the business that you really want. Another thing I think is the fact that they got to a point where folks who were drivers even were coming up with AI solutions was a great yardstick or a measure of progress there for Ryan and his team, because like he mentioned, they were folks that on that spectrum of adoption that are going to take a little bit longer to feel comfortable. And the fact that ideas were flowing in across the board was really valuable. Speaking of, I also want to have that takeaway highlighted where he mentioned that he'd rather have too many ideas on his whiteboard than too few. This is another conversation that I have had with a number of CEOs and leaders where y'all are worried that people are going to be using something too much and you slow down your adoption and transformation efforts. That is going to be the case in some cases with some specific folks, but I want you to think about your overall workforce and what level of AI adoption or reflexive thinking you want to to have, and think about your entire workforce in terms of whether you're getting people to try and use it more or less. And I'd be very surprised. I definitely want to hear from you if you feel like you folks are using it too much and across your team, especially if you're in a little bit more of a traditional industry like Ryan is. Also, bonus points for using AI to help better communicate with your workforce. In their case, language barrier was one that they helped overcome for things like training and safety videos, as well as rolling out their 401k plan. I don't want it to be language specific. I think if you look at things like behavioral analysis, you know that different folks in your workforce like to be spoken to differently, like to make decisions differently, like different levels of information before they're ready to move forward. And the language capabilities of AI, I think, can be really powerful in engaging your workforce where they want to be met versus using a one-to-many messaging system anymore. The second thing that I really like is how they were able to add more data into the decision-making and ultimately drive better operations. You mentioned a couple of examples. One of them was that call center one, where they were able to really divert what I would imagine to be a ton of budget from what they thought was a PR issue, but instead ended up being more of a website upgrade or update rather that had more information about frequently asked questions to their call center. And this may seem surprising, but I've seen it play out many times. And what happens is when the sensitivity or the criticality of a very few number of phone calls can be really bad, this perception becomes reality where folks start to think that those few phone calls, because they're so hard to hear, in your mind you end up thinking that's most of the problems that you have. Whereas when you look at the data, you realize that most of the calls actually are about information and not about complaints. And it's just that the information calls probably didn't surface in any of the leadership calls because they're not noteworthy compared to someone who had a really big problem or a really big complaint. So that I thought was a really good example of how they were using data to drive decisions, and they acquired this data. Instead of spending $150K, they were able to spend $2,000 as a one-time cost plus some open source models to transcribe their customer center calls and get better insights. And I would imagine that's just the first of many major decisions that they're going to be able to make now that they have this information readily available. And even better, like they've hook this information up to a language model with a UI so people can query the information that's being transcribed and synthesized way easier than before as well. So there's a number of ways in which AI was used there, and I thought that was really cool. Also, how they improved the quality of the data, things like geolocation and address validation, which I can imagine cause much better operations as a result of this improvement and way fewer headaches and a much more engaged workforce. So I think thinking about new ways to make better decisions to improve your operations and knowing that you might have more data available to you than you think is another great takeaway there. The third one is arriving at this using a little bit of product thinking. Now, Ryan may not have called it that. We do over here where you're really focused on the problem a lot more and valuing the problem before chasing after the solutions. I also appreciate his vulnerability in sharing some of the pitfalls there and how he ended up maybe spending a little bit more time on some of those things. But that was part of the learning and iteration curve for them to arrive at something that you can avoid the first time around, where you really consider what the implication of the solution is while you think about the investment alongside. I will say that it's probably not worth it to overthink it and get it super precise. If you feel like you're going to break even on something, but at the same time, you're able to get some at-bats and learn more about using AI, develop some more trust on your workforce around AI, even that would be worth it in the early stages of adoption, even if it seems more break-even than giving you like a 10x ROI or something. And then the last thing I think are really scrappy ways in which they have implemented technology so that they could overcome certain hurdles. Now, I know a lot of you would say, hey, we're a government contractor, we could never use AI. And you can see here that there are solutions in play where you use open source, where you can use local hardware. There are even companies like Grok, GROQ, where they have as part of their licensing agreement that they'll never learn off your data. And they actually help you get a cloud equivalent of the open source models like Mistral and all the others that actually that someone like Ryan may have put on that local device. So if you want to avoid that step of figuring out what the right gaming device is and everything else, and you want a cloud provider, there are options out there more than the ones that we hear about often, like OpenAI and Claude, that might be a little bit more friendly about how they treat your data and protect your sensitivity. While in their case with Ryan, maybe that was a non-starter because they're government contractors and they're just not allowed to put their data in the cloud at all. I've worked with other CEOs that, for example, have just really sensitive information around like search terms or something that they just don't want anyone else knowing about. And those are, I think, great examples of which you can use these open source models, whether on cloud or on a local device. I also think it's really cool how they were able to overcome cost barriers by using open source, by using something that they built themselves versus an off-the-shelf software, and also something that's on local hardware. And I think one of the key takeaways there is that they defined for themselves what a good enough quality was based on the outcome and the output that they wanted from the AI. And, one can argue that if it was a lot better than what they needed, there's an inefficiency there, especially if there's a cost associated for that, how much better than good enough. So the fact that they were able to think about that so pragmatically, I think, was really cool. So those are a few things that I think were especially impressive about the self-proclaimed vibe coding garbage man to come up with so much technology innovation in a very traditional company with a lot of blue-collar workers. We'll be back next week, maybe doing a little bit more of a deep dive on this. So stay tuned for that, for another episode of Convergence.fm. We'll see you there. Thank you for joining me on the Convergence Podcast today. Subscribe to the Convergence Podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your content. If you're listening and found this helpful, please give us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and tell me what you think about what you heard today.